Good morning, everyone. Today, I think you can kind of figure out what our topic is on, is music, how music has changed through, our life. Music has been a part of the human race since the beginning of time. It's always been there, whether just snapping your finger. There's always been a beat that's been carried through us throughout time. To stand up here and give you a presentation on how music has changed from the start of time to where we are now, I think it would take several days. So to spare all of you, your poor little butts sitting in those chairs, we have narrowed it down to how music has changed just through the century. So here we go. Starting towards the beginning of the 1900s, we have the Roaring 20s. Now, to give you a background of where music was coming from, or coming out of in the 1900s, you have, in the 1900s, the phonograph, his master's voice, which was created by E.R. Johnson, and this was really a breakthrough for music, because what this was the ability to record your voice and have it in your home with the record player. You could even record your own voice in your own home and then replay it again. So this was a major, major breakthrough for music. Also during this time was when jazz music started to take over. So classical music began to die away, and the promiscuous jazz music came in as the American elites thought it was. And Jelly Roll Morton, as was his stage name, was really considered the father of jazz. And he began playing in brothels, and when his grandmother found out about that, he was kicked out of the home. And here's a little sample of what his music sounded like. So there's a little taste of a little Jelly Roll for you. Now, the jazz music, it was really frowned upon in the beginning because it was the advance of being able to talk about sex freely. It was in public, and it gave women the ability to smoke in public without being ridiculed. Also, it brought about the flappers. And so it was more directed towards teenagers, and what more of the higher class American elites, is what they were called, tried to do was to force classical music on the younger generation. But it really didn't take a hold, and jazz music really spread very far and wide through the world. And it really erupted with Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues. So even though it doesn't sound like something that's very entertaining, when you really think about music during this time, this was something that just was never even heard of, that kind of style, that tempo. It was a beat that really wanted to make you move. And that was not something that was done back then. Another major figure was Louis Armstrong. He's a very, very famous singer and trumpet player. He was also very famous for creating what is known as scat. And what that is where you take a bunch of syllables together and you just kind of sing. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it sounds kind of cool. And he's very famous for his song, What a Wonderful World.
I see trees of green. I see them blue from me.
So, very famous song. So, to go into the 1930s, this was these were years of much hardship. Because the 1930s were years of depression, and you had the Dust Bowl, and a lot of people were out of jobs. So it was a hard time, and the economy was just in shambles. But one thing that really kept the people together, kept their spirits going, was music. And the way that they got their music was through a home radio. Almost every home in America by this time had a radio in it. And at the end of the evening, when you come home from either looking for a job or working 4 jobs, you turn on your radio with your family and you forget about your troubles. It was a way that connected people together. It was through the invention of the radio, home radio. So this was one of the big things that kept people together during this time. It was their only entertainment. Also during this time, we had some major figures being brought up and started to make their first appearances, especially with Bing Crosby. He had, almost every hit that he had was very famous, especially his White Christmas. That was a very famous one. And Billie Holiday, very, very famous singer. She led a lot of the female African Americans in the jazz movement. You also had cute little Shirley Temple, and even though she was more famous for her movies, she's also very famous for singing as well. Very cute little curls. So, then in the 1940s, jazz music was still huge. This is probably when jazz music really just was very predominant during this time. You had people like Ella Fitzgerald and Nat King Cole, and also the very, very famous Frank Sinatra. And during the entire 40s, he was on top of the billboards, all throughout the whole 40s. And his popularity would only be matched later in life by Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and Michael Jackson, still to this day. So, and his famous song, Fly Me to the Moon.
Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars.
Listen to that all day, I love that. One other genre that really became popular towards like the middle of the 40s was country music. Now at this time, it wasn't called country music, it was called hillbilly music. Because it was farmers and people with their cowboy hats and their fiddles and their guitars. It wasn't, the term country music wasn't coined later until about 1945 when they officially, that was their name. And some of the, Hank Williams was a very famous country singer, and unfortunately he struggled through his whole career with alcoholism and drug abuse, and he died at a very young age of 46. So, but through his whole career he was very popular. Another figure was Roy Rogers, and Roy Rogers was a very famous actor as well. And one of the things that made him famous was the fact that he sang all of his songs in his videos. So you saw him a lot of times riding a horse in his films with a guitar singing. And so he was very popular during that time period. And he was really cute too, all the ladies like them. And then you had Tex Williams, who also was like Roy Rogers, played in, not as cute,
yeah.
yes. But he had a wonderful, nice little raspy voice. So, and then to close out the 40s, in 1949, on top of the billboards, was Vaughn Monroe and his famous song, Ghost Riders in the Sky.
Through 4 decades of pop, rock and roll, and we'll just stop. The 50s music came in with singers like Elvis Presley. It was formed in the United States. Bill Haley and his Comets, their top #1 song was Rock Around the Clock. And Elvis, when he came in, he brought sex on the stage with his dance movements and his movement of his pelvic area. He had awesome music.
Swing, you should have heard the knocked out jailbird sing that rock.
And the day the music died, we lost our Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. They were on their way to a show, early morning hours in Iowa, and their plane crashed, and they all three died. Then as we go into the 60s, the 60s was an all different type of music. It was involved around the Vietnam War, marijuana, acid, LSD. And there was a new form of music that also came into the 60s. It was called bubblegum music. And one of the #1 songs was called Monster Mash. And there was a song called Sugar Sugar by the Archies.
Sugar, oh honey, honey, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting.
And, like I said, during the 60s, drugs was a really big thing back then. And there was a band by the name of Iron Butterfly. Do any of you, have you ever heard of Iron Butterfly? I'm sure you have. When they went to do their song In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, have any of you heard of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida? They were so wasted. The actual name of the song was supposed to be In the Garden of Eve, but they were so wasted and stoned that they could not pronounce In the Garden of Eve. The only thing that could come out of their mouth was In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. This is a video of Butterfly and the original recording. And you can see they're stoned.
Don't you know that I'm loving you? In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, baby. Don't you know that I'll always be true? Oh, won't you come with me?
And of course, our Rolling Stones. I love the Rolling Stones. They were awesome. Their song, Paint It Black, most people thought that it was involved about the Vietnam War, but in truth, it wasn't. Mick Jagger wrote the song, he sang the song, and the song was about a man that had lost his lover, and all he could see was black. Everything he saw was black, and that was from having a broken heart. Very good song. But their very first song that they wrote was a remake of Chuck Berry's Come On.
Everything from me, my baby party, all day long, walking cause I commit my car, started later from the job, and work and check it. Always somebody come along and run it, train wreck it, come on. This is me, my baby.
And of course, we had the Monkees. I used to love the Monkees. Their #1 song was Take the Last Train to Clarksville, but they also had a TV show, and it aired from 1966 to 1968. And of course, our Beatles. They formed in 1960 in Liverpool. And one of their very top songs was Yesterday. And the Beach Boys and their surfing music. Their very top song was called Surfing. And the Animals, The House of the Rising Sun, hit the charts and stayed on the charts for quite some time. And our grandfather of soul, James Brown. James Brown, believe it or not, was almost our neighbor. He lived in Georgia, and that's where he grew up. He grew up on a small farm in Georgia. And the interesting thing about James Brown, he lived in poverty. He worked his way up, and that's how he become to be called the grandfather of soul. He learned his moves and his music while working in the cotton fields. And we lost James Brown in 2006 on Christmas Day. He was 82 years old. And Led Zeppelin and their famous song, Stairway to Heaven, they were awesome. Now, we're going into my era. The 70s was an awesome time, and it was fun. We had light-up dance floors, the disco music, strobe lights, and it was just an awesome, awesome time. Elton John's Rocket Man hit the charts in 1970. And then when the disco era hit, Saturday Night Fever. This can explain how the disco era was. I'll tell you kind of how it was. Most towns had like discotheques, and they would have dance contests. You could win money. You could dress up really nice in your pretty outfits. You could put on your designer jeans and your fancy top and platform shoes and listen to the Bee Gees. And some of that music was just so awesome, you just couldn't sit still to the sounds of the music. You had to get up and move. And also it brought couples back together to dance together. And the video that I'm going to show you now, it speaks for itself about the disco era.
Now we have Stephanie Mangano and Tony Manero.
All right.
Another one of those, huh?
Hey, come on, you had enough. All right, get high, it's your head.
That's right.
There you go.
And also in 1970, we lost one of our most famous, very talented guitarists, Jimi Hendrix, to drugs. He died in London. But also in 1970, we gained a very talented, beautiful, exquisite lady, Mariah Carey. Now, as we go into the 80s was an all-new era of music. We had heavy metal coming in, hard rock, and MTV.
This is it. Welcome to MTV Music Television, the world's first 24-hour stereo.
Michael Jackson became the king of pop in the 80s, and his Thriller album was the best-selling album of all time. Here's a little sample of Michael's music, the song Thriller.
Okay, yes, I know I can't dance, but we go on into the 80s. Boy, 80s, man, generation on the 80s, because 80s hair bands, I just think are just amazing. Okay, anyways, going on, we have Metallica, started in the 80s, had some phenomenal hits, love them. And Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle, one of their top hits, wonderful song. I mean, this was just an era of just lots of hard sounding songs and music, and it was just awesome. Queen also started in the 80s, and they had so many great hits. And one of my favorite ones that I just had to play for you was Fat Bottom Girls.
Oh, you gonna take me home tonight? Oh, down beside that red firelight. Oh, you gonna let it all hang out? Fat bottom girls, you make the rockin' world go round.
Anyways, that was one of their famous songs. It was a wonderful song. In the 1990s, you saw the start of rap music, a lot of techno and auto-tune, which was the way to be able to transpose your voice using technology. You could also do records over your voice, which was starting to become very popular. And you had for years start to appear like Snoop Dogg, and another one was Vanilla Ice. His famous song, Ice Ice Baby.
Oh,
Yo, VIP,
Did you want to dance?
let's kick it.
Alright, so that's enough of that one. And then also, boy bands. You had like NSYNC, Newsboys, when they started popping up, and they had a lot of hits for a long time. Also, Britney Spears began to make her first appearances, and through the 1990s, she was considered one of the top female performers during this time. Also, as was touched before, Mariah Carey started making her first appearances in the 1990s, and was also on top of the female performers. Actually, she was considered the female performer of the decade during this time. So going into the 2000s, starting out, there's so many different genres of music coming out, and there's just hundreds. All the way from rap, you still have, instrumental music, techno, emo, just everything. So I'm going to touch just a little basis on just some of the major ones that probably everyone knows. Eminem, really big figure in the rap world, and he's still very famous to this day. And you have country music taking off. You have Jason Aldean, and one of his famous songs, it just came out not too long ago, Burning It Down. And Katy Perry, she's still top of the Billboard still. And then you have Lady Gaga, who is famous, for her kind of drastically interesting style of costumes. Still one on the top of the billboards. And to close out, you have Maroon 5, and I think they're a pretty good band. And one of their songs right now that's top is Sugar.
I'm hurting, baby. I'm up and down. I need your loving, I need it now. When I'm without you, I'm something weak. You got me begging, I'm on my knees. I wanna be needing your love, I just wanna be deep in your love. Asking you when you're away. Oh baby, 'cause I don't care where you are, I just wanna be there where you are. And I give it one little day. Sugar, yes please, won't you come and put it down on me? I'm right here, 'cause I need.
All right. So to conclude, you can see that music has come a very long way. I mean, from the 1950s with Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues, which to us, like, wow, how was that ever famous? You know, to someone like Maroon 5 now, it's just, it's really cool to see the change that music has gone through. And I think it's a very important part of our lives. It helps drive us and helps take our minds off of the worries of the world. So I thank each and every one of you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation and just the walk through the century of music as it's changed. Thank you very much.